Hello, folks. Thanks for turning out tonight. And I know we'd have a bigger crowd except for the terrible weather. I don't know if you look, but it's raining like holy hell out there right now. No, actually, it's raining in Seattle. I'm here to entertain you. I believe that stories are for entertainment. All art is for entertainment. And we're going to have lots of fun tonight. I had a different variety of fun in mind. However, I was going to turn you on to the only Christmas story I've ever written. It's coming out in my new book. It's called 3/4 of the Way to Hell, A Christmas Story. But my wife, whom I will refer to as Frau Boyle from now on, which is how she's known in Germany, Frau Boyle discouraged me. She felt it would bum you out too much. So instead, I'm going to read you two delightful stories. One is an older story, which I love to warm you up with, and then a new story from the new collection. The first one derives from an experience I had. And this is odd because I write about anything that moves me in any way, in any voice, any mode, and very rarely do I have anything autobiographical. And this particular story, though, was generated in this way. When my daughter was in the 5th grade, she asked me to go with her to her DARE program on the culmination of it, on the final night of this. And I had some mixed feelings about it. But I went, and I brooded on it, and I wrote this story. Now, please don't confuse me with the guy in this story. This is not me. This is an invented character. But of course, this thing happened because I happened to sit in the auditorium that night and see what was going down. The story is called Back in the Eocene. And it begins with, and as a sort of trope throughout, are some of these words that you have to learn for your SAT, and some of the things that you're expected to know when you're in school, because again, this man going to the elementary school is feeling tremendous nostalgia and being taken back in time. And in the middle of the story, he's going to get a little outraged, and he's going to ask some questions in his mind. And I think you will all know the answer to those questions. So, back in the Eocene. Abscissa, ordinate, isosceles, carboniferous, Mesozoic, holothurium. The terms come to him in a rush of disinterred syllables, a forgotten language conjured by the sudden sharp smell of chalk dust and blackboards. It happens every time. All he has to do is glance at the bicycle rack out front, with a flag snapping crisply atop the gleaming aluminum pole, and the memories begin to wash over him. A typhoon of faces and places and names. Ilona Sharo and Richie Davidson, Manifest Destiny, Hetty Greaves, the Sea of Tranquility, and the 3 longest rivers in Russia. He takes his daughter's hand and shuffles toward the glowing auditorium, already choked up. Inside, it's worse. There, under the pale yellow gaze of the overhead lights, recognition cuts at him like a knife. It's invested in the feel of the hard steel frames and cushionless planks of the seats, in the crackling PA system and the sad array of frosted cupcakes and chocolate chip cookies presided over by a puffy matron from the PTA. And the smells. Pine sol, floor wax, festering underarms and erupting feet. A faint lingering whiff of meatloaf and wax beans. Wax beans. He hasn't had a wax bean, hasn't inserted a wax bean in his mouth in what, 20 years? The thought overwhelms him as he stands there awkwardly a moment just inside the door. And then there's a tug at his hand, and his daughter slips away, flitting through the crowd like a bird to chase after her friends. He finds a seat in back. The big, stark institutional clock shows 5 minutes of 8. Settling into the unforgiving grip of the chair, he concentrates on the faces of his fellow parents, vaguely familiar from previous incarnations, as they trudge up and down the aisles like automatons. Voices buzz round him in an expectant drone. High heels click on the linoleum. Chairs scrape. He's dreaming a scene from another auditorium an ice age ago. Detention hall, the soporific text, shouts from beyond the windows, and a sharp, sweet taste of spring on the air, when Officer Rudman steps up to the microphone. A hush falls over the auditorium. The gale of chatter dropping off to a breeze, a stir in the rafters, nothing. His daughter, 10 years old and beautiful, her feet too big and her shoulders slumped, strides up the aisle and drops into the chair beside him as if her legs have been shot out from under her. "Dad," she whispers, "that's Officer Rudman." He nods. Who else would it be up there in his spit and polish, his close-cropped hair and custom-fit uniform? Who else, with his sunny smile and weightlifter's torso, who else but Officer Rudman, coordinator of the school's anti-drug program and heartthrob of all the fifth-grade girls? A woman with frosted hair and remodeled hips ducks in late and settles noiselessly into the chair in front of him. "Good evening," Officer Rudman says. "I'm Officer Rudman." Someone coughs. Feedback hisses through the speakers. In the next moment, they're rising clumsily in a cacophony of rustling, stamping, and nose-blowing as Officer Rudman leads them in the Pledge of Allegiance. Hands over hearts, a murmur of half-remembered words. He's conscious of his daughter's voice beside him and of his own, and he shifts his eyes to steal a glimpse of her. Her face is serene, shining, hopeful, a recapitulation and refinement of her mother's. And suddenly it's too much for him, and he has to look down at his feet. "With liberty and justice for all." More coughing. The seats creak. They sit. Officer Rudman gives the crowd a good long look, and then he begins. "Drugs are dangerous," he says. "We all know that." And he pauses, while the principal, a thick-ankled woman with feathered hair and a dogged expression, translates in her halting Spanish, "Las drogas son peligrosas." The man sits there in back, his daughter at his side, tasting wax beans, rushing with Weltschmerz and nostalgia. Eocene, designating or of the earliest epoch of the tertiary period in the Cenozoic era, during which mammals became the dominant animals. Je rompe, tu rompes. Il rompe, nous rompons, vous rompez, il rompe. They didn't have drugs when he was in elementary school. Didn't have crack and crank, didn't have ice and heroin and AIDS to go with it. Not in elementary school, not in the 50s. They didn't even have pot. Mary Jane, that's what they called it in the high school health films, but no one ever called it that. Not on this planet anyway. It was pot, pure and simple, and he smoked it like anyone else. He's remembering his first joint, age 17, a walk-up on Broome Street, holes in the walls, bottles, rats, padlocks on the doors, one puff and you're hooked. When Officer Rudman beckons a skinny, dark-haired kid to the microphone. Big adult hands choke the neck of the stand and the mic drops a foot. Stretching till his ankles rise up out of his high tops, the kid clutches at the microphone and recites his pledge to stay off drugs in a piping, timbreless voice. "My name is Stephen Taylor, and I have good feelings of self-esteem about myself," he says, his super-amplified breathing whistling through the interstices. "And I pledge never to take drugs or to put anything bad in my body. If somebody asked me if I want drugs, I would just say no, turn my back, change the subject, walk away, and just say no." Brainwashing. That's what Linda called it when he phoned to break their date for tonight. Easy for her to say. But then she didn't have a daughter. Didn't know. Couldn't imagine what it was like to feel the net expand beneath you, high out over that chasm of crashing rock. "What good did it do you?" she said. "Or me?" She had a point. Hash, keef, LSD, cocaine, heroin. He'd heard all the warnings, watched all the movies, but how could you take anyone's word for it? Was it possible even? He'd sat through driver's ed, sobering statistics, scare films and all, and then taken his mother's Ford out on the highway and burned the tires off it. Scotch, gin, whiskey, Boone's Farm, Night Train, Colt 45, Seconal, Tuinol, Quaalude. He'd heard all the warnings, yes. But when the time came, he stuck the needle in his arm and drew back the plunger to watch the clear solution flush with his own smoldering blood. "You remember to take your vitamins today?" "My name is Lucy Fidel, and I pledge never to abuse drugs, alcohol, or tobacco because I like myself and the world and my school, and I can get high just from life." "My name is Roberto Campos, and I don't want to die from drugs. Peer pressure is what makes kids use drugs, and I will just say no. I will walk away, and I will change the subject. Voy a decir no." Officer Rudman adjusts the microphone, clasps his hands in front of him. The parents lean forward. He holds their eyes. "You've all just heard the fifth graders' pledges," he says. "And these kids mean it. I'm proud of them. Let's have a big hand for these kids." And there it is, thunderous. All those parents in their suits and sport coats and skirts, wearing sober, earnest, angry looks, pounding their hands together in relief, as if that could do it, as if the force of their acclamation could drive the gangs from the streets or nullify that infinitely seductive question to which no is never the answer. He claps along with them, not daring to glance down at his daughter, picturing the first boy, the skinny, dark one, up against the wall with the handcuffs on him, dead in the street, wasting away in some charity ward. And the girl, mother of 4, twice divorced, strung out on martinis and diet pills and wielding the Jeep Cherokee like a weapon. That's what it came down to. That's what the warnings meant. Agape, Ulysses S. Grant, Parthenogenesis, the Monitor, and the Merrimack, Jan Cassius as a lean and hungry look. His daughter takes his hand. Now there's a movie, she whispers. What happened to finger painting? Hearts for Valentine's Day and bunnies for Easter. 5th grade, for Christ's sake. Where was Treasure Island, Little Women, Lassie Come Home? What had happened? Who was responsible? Where did it go wrong? He's on the verge of raising his hand and demanding an answer of Officer Rudman, the nostalgia gone sour in his throat now. But the lights dim and the film begins. A flicker of movement on the screen, bars, a jail cell. He watches a junkie writhe and scream, a demonic, sunken-eyed man beating his head against the wall, someone, somewhere, lights flashing, police, handcuffs, more screams. Smoke a joint and you're hooked. How they laughed over that one, he and Tony Gaetti, and laughed again to realize it was true. Cooking the dope in a bottle cap, stealing disposable syringes, getting off in the restroom on the train and feeling they'd snowed the world. Things were different then. That was a long time ago. Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, Homo erectus. His daughter's hand is crushing him, prim and cool, lying across his palm like a demolished building, a cement truck, glacial moraine. Up on the screen, the junkies are gone, replaced by a sunny schoolyard and a clone of Officer Rudman. Statistics now, grim but hopeful. Inspiring music, smiling faces, kids who just say no. When it's over, he feels dazed, the lights flashing back on to transfix him like some animal startled along a darkened highway. All he wants is to be out of here. No more questions, no more tricks of memory, no more Officer Rudman or the vapid stares of his fellow parents. Honey, he whispers, bringing his face down close to his daughter's. We gotta go. Officer Rudman's chin is cocked back, his arms folded across his chest. Any questions, he asks. But Dad, the cake sale. The cake sale. We're gonna have to miss it this time, he whispers. And suddenly, he's on his feet, slumping his shoulders in the way people do when they duck out of meetings early or come late to the concert or theater, a gesture of submission and apology. His daughter hangs back. She wants to stay, wants cake, wants to see her friends. But he tugs at her hand, and then they're fighting their way through the gauntlet of concerned parents at the door and out into the night. Dad, she cries, tugging back at him. And only then does he realize he's hurting her, clutching her hand like a lifeline in a swirl of darkening waters. I mean, have a cow, why don't you, she says, and he drops her hand. Sorry, I wasn't thinking. The flag is motionless, hanging limp now against the pole. He gazes up at the stars fixed in their tracks, cold and distant. And then the gravel crunches underfoot, and they're in the parking lot. I just wanted a piece of cake, his daughter says. In the car, on the way home to her mother's house, she stares moodily out the window to let him feel the weight of her disappointment, but she can't sustain it. Before long, she's chattering away about Officer Rudman and Officer Torres, who sometimes helps with the program, telling him how nice they are and how corrupt the world is. We have gangs here, she says. Did you know that, right here in our neighborhood? He gazes out on $500,000 homes, stone and stucco, mailboxes out front, basketball hoops over garage doors. The streets are deserted. He sees no gangs. Here? Chrissy Mueller saw two guys in Raiders hats at the 7-Eleven the other day. Maybe they were just buying ho-hos. Maybe they just wanted a piece of cake. Come on, Dad, she says, but her tone tells him all is forgiven. Her mother's house is lighted like an arena. Porch lights, security lights, even the windows poking bright, gleaming holes in the fabric of the night. He leans over to kiss his daughter goodnight, the car vibrating beneath him. Dad? Yes? I just wanted to, ask you, did you ever use drugs? Or Mom? The question catches him by surprise. He looks beyond her, looks at that glowing, bright house a moment, curtains open wide, the wash of light on the lawn. Abstertion, epopt, Eleusinian, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. No, he says finally, no. That's it. Thank you. So you see what real direct experience can do to you. This is why I try to stay away from it as much as possible. Almost everything I do is an invention of some sort, and it could be something I've read. In fact, Tim and I were talking about this backstage. You just need something to spur the story, and then the story evolves. And to anticipate one of your questions about process, Everything I do is organic. It all starts with the first line, and I just follow it to see where it's going to go. Of course, I don't want to sound too mystical. It would take me, the little story I just read you might have taken me a week or so, or a week and a half to actually do the writing. Perfecting each part as you move along. But I never have an outline. I never know what it will be until I get there.